cómo se están formando y cuáles son esos desafíos que tienen los científicos del comportamiento y cómo conectarlos con el impacto y con la responsabilidad social de cara a los desafíos regionales.
Sí, para cerrar nos acompaña Alistair
wrap things up,
Fildes,
we have
vicedecano de
Dr.
Ciencias del
Alistair
Comportamiento
Fildes. He's
en
the Vice
EA
Dean of Behavioral
University en
Sciences at
España y
EA
director de
University
grado en
in Spain.
Comportamiento y Ciencias Sociales.
Alistair es sociólogo y criminólogo. Ha trabajado con gobiernos y empresas en el Reino Unido, en Australia,
In companies
y
all
además ha
over the
diseñado
UK and Australia,
intervenciones.
he has designed behavioral interventions in the context of mental health, security,
Hoy
and
lidera uno de
organizational
los
change.
programas de
He
formación
now
más
leads one
innovadores
of
de
the most
Europa.
innovative
Su enfoque combina
transformational
teoría,
change in
práctica y
Europe. He
exploración de la
combines
realidad
theory,
emocional de
practice,
los
and the
estudiantes.
exploration of the emotional reality of students. In the same way, Ghana has inspired us, in addition to having a conference on data and in artificial intelligence, Alistair will connect our Gen Z generation with all the challenges that data are bringing along. His conference, Developing and Recruiting the Next Generation of Behavioral Scientists, will lay a bridge between
Una
the
charla para
challenges that we
quienes
must
creemos
face.
que
This
formar
is a
también es
talk
transformar.
that
Con
for those of
ustedes,
us who believe
Alistair
that
Fildes.
training is also a way to transform. I now give you Dr. Alistair Fildes. Les presentamos excusas, no estamos recibiendo el audio del presentador. No tenemos audio de la presentación, por favor alguien le hace saber al ponente que debe tenerse un segundo. No tenemos audio. No tenemos audio de la presentación. I have a question. No tenemos audio de la presentación. No me está llegando audio. Estoy escuchando mi propia voz. Le solicitamos excusas a la audiencia. No recibimos audio del presentador. Por eso no estamos facilitando la interpretación. No estamos recibiendo audio del presentador. Seguimos sin
Para,
recibir
uy,
audio.
perdón, la voz de Dios, ¿no?
The voice of God.
Voy a cambiar inglés, gracias.
Okay, I'm going to switch to English now.
There are two audiences
Teníamos
for
dos
this presentation.
audiencias para esta
There are those
presentación.
of you
Aquellos
who
de
are
ustedes
Generación Z,
que hacen
and those of you who are working with Gen Z. You are recruiting them, you are developing them. So these are the two things I want you to take today, or what we can do together to supplement your knowledge and skills in behavior, and what can help you in the future as well, whether you are one or whether you are working with them as well. So, this is terrible, I shouldn't be switching Spanglish. So, la tema de la conferencia es cooperar es el camino que nos une para construir juntos el futuro. Es muy importante porque yo quiero compartir mi experiencia en la universidad en Madrid. So I will go back to English now. But pardon Luis, the translator at the back. So there are two things I want to talk about today and what we can do about it. First, what is Generation Z? We all know what Gen AI is, but I also want to explain why the combination of these two things is already seeing an impact in further education, and it will be having an impact for all of you in wherever you are working. So we have a new generation that are interacting with a disruptive technology. Which is already producing current and future changes that is going to affect how we develop, nurture, and recruit future behavioral and social scientists. So this affects us all. So I'll just tell you before I start talking about this, why is this important to me? So one of my roles as Vice Dean in IE University is I run a program, un grado, a Bachelor in Behavior and Social Sciences in Madrid, Spain. So what is this program? First, similar to some of the other speakers, Mary was talking about in the UN, we are trying to create a multidisciplinary profile. If you want to be a psychologist, there are very many good universities that do psychology degrees. But what we are trying to create here is people that know a little of a lot of things. Why is that important? Because the problems we see today, crime, social inequality, climate change, cannot be solved with one disciplinary perspective. If a psychologist could solve all the problems, we would all be psychologists in this room. So what we value is if you want to create new solutions, you need to know a lot of different things. Neuroscience, economics, behavioral science, law, anthropology, sociology, psychology. We give our students a little of a lot of things so they have different lenses to apply to human problems. But the challenge with that is, for many of us who work in organizations, how do we convince people to try an experiment? How do we actually get people to listen to us and to try to understand their problems? The way that we do that is we give the students a heavy dose in leadership and influencing. It's something we specifically do because wherever you all go in any organization, you need to have the best influencing skills, the best team working skills, because you are trying to get people to do something new. And with new comes risks. Risks to their jobs, risks to productivity. Because you're going to evaluate people. How will you know if it works or not? So what you need to be able to have is the best interpersonal skills to listen to people, understand their problems, build trust, and then convince them to run experiments. So that's what we seek to do in the program. And we also get to do, with this audience, who are very interested in behavioral science, we also get them to run experiments, which I will talk about later. So, I know I'm speaking to a number of social scientists and behavioral scientists here, so I will be very clear. I am cherry-picking evidence here. I'm wanting to give you 3 pieces of evidence. So Gen Z, aged between 10 and 29, and here are my 3 facts that I want to share with you. First, Gen Z spend on average 109 days a year looking at a screen. Now, we all look at screens, we all have our phones, but they consume more information than any other generation that we've ever seen before. And I think we all understand the effects of consuming that amount of information for our mental health, for our motivation, for our behavior. All of us have been affected by the use of social media and screens. Especially with Gen Z, we are spending less time building face-to-face meaningful relationships. So if we have a look at this chart here, in 2009 is the growth of the iPhone and smartphone. 2012, everybody starts dipping. We are spending, as a community across the world, less time making meaningful face-to-face connection. Our connections are with the digital world and very little with the physical world compared to previous generations. And then, this is the thing I love to tell my students to see their shocked faces. Gen Z will be living longer, but you'll also be working longer than previous generations. So the analogy I have here, I have a 4-year-old son at home. Based on him being born in 2020, he has a 50-50 chance of living past his 100. So the idea he's going to retire at 65, it's not going to happen. So what does that matter for Generation Z? It matters that your longevity and your consistency is there because you will not be retiring at the same age as your parents. It's just not going to happen. So, in summary, Gen Z will live longer. That's the good news. I'm afraid you're going to work more longer as well. You're also exposed to increasing amounts of information, but also you will tend to use less time to build meaningful face-to-face relationships, which can have an effect on a variety of things, including your positive mental health. Now, we have Gen AI. I'm going to switch to Spanish now. Levanta su mano que ha usado Gen AI en la última vez. Okay, so 85% for the people at home. So a lot of us have used it at this point. Now, I am just talking here from my perspective in the university. We have all of these tools. We're all becoming familiar with them in terms of what they can do, in terms of bringing together knowledge. I see this as some things about opportunities and risks. So the opportunity to democratize knowledge. The idea that you don't have to have a massive amount of information behind you, you can actually ask the algorithm and it will come back and will give you some form of answer. The question is, can you evaluate whether that's actually true or not? If you've ever put your own name into ChatGPT, I very much recommend it. I think yo soy de Escocia, it said I was Dutch. So I don't think there's something going on there. But also, there is the opportunity with the productivity as well, in terms of making more efficient use of your time. But there are issues. There are issues in terms of the reliability of the output of these machines. There are issues in terms of the perverse incentives that can come along with using these tools. Let me give you an example. If you are in a class and say the majority of people are using Gen AI tools to draw together for essays or for deliverables, how are you incentivized to create something original if you see that those people are getting high marks? You can say, well, this is important to me. I have an intrinsic motivation to do something that is original to me. But tends to be sometimes with some perverse incentives. Well, if this person is doing it, they are getting this mark, then I might as well use it as well. And that is a challenge for all of us in higher education. And then the final element, it's one of the challenges. We understand the reliability of these tools, of what they actually produce, is an issue as well. But there's a particular issue in higher and further education as well in high schools as well, because the level of knowledge that is produced by them is generally what you would expect a year one bachelor student to be. So how do we detect when somebody has written it or when somebody has just used one of these tools to create it as well? That is a challenge that we keep seeing. The one lesson I tell all my students, if you're going to write to me, don't use ChatGPT. I can smell it and I will delete your email. Because if you are emailing me, you want me to read it, I want to hear your voice. I do not need you to write something that you think is socially desirable. So that is very important to me, and that's something that I need to do more of. So the final thing about this is there then becomes a motivation to then become dependent on these tools. I'll give you an example from a student from Bogota, actually last week, Emilio. Emilio shared an example from one of the classes. He says they are split into groups to talk for 5 minutes about a topic. You talk as a group, you work out what your view is, you come back to the classroom, and then you share what your group talked about. And Emilio said, what happens is, one person takes their phone out, says, these are the 5 things we need to say, and that's it. You've got 4 minutes to talk to your friends. So there are things that we need to change about how we teach and how we evaluate as well, but this is one of the challenges we have. We cannot rely that what people are creating is necessarily authentic to them and original to them. So for those of us who are working with people who are using these, as we see, the majority of us are using these tools. There are potential short to medium-term consequences of these things. So they're more efficient in terms of collating and analyzing information, but there's less experience on a further and higher education level of critical thinking, of being able to debate and defend your work, and ultimately less likelihood of creating original work. So that's where I feel that we are right now. So what can be done? I'm going to share with you some of the things that we are doing in EA right now, but also some things in the future. So first, we need to change, in terms of supplementing our skills, how we help Generation Z or our colleagues in terms of how they experience critical thinking, but also how we are going to spend more effort in terms of testing the authenticity of what they actually create. So, before we start, if you are a member of Gen Z, think about how can I apply this when I'm finding work, or how I can apply this in my existing role. How can I demonstrate my critical thinking, and how can I demonstrate the authenticity and the originality of my work? If you're recruiting, developing, or working with Gen Z, what resources can I access to adapt these activities as well? What are the things that I can use to really dig into? Does this person actually know what they're talking about? And how do we do that? And then, if you work in higher education, you have no lens, this is for you. So, one of the things that I'm sure you've all heard with the use of these tools is we need to encourage critical thinking. There has been a long-standing debate in universities. Do we teach critical thinking formally through a course or informally? As in you learn it through your 3 or 4 years of study, and that's how you learn your critical thinking. But I'm going to provide the QR code. I've been thinking about, if I'm asking people to think more critically, what does that actually mean? That can be a product of your experience, of how you develop your intuition through experience of what actually works. But we need a bit more of a framework to actually manage this. This is a very good book by a guy called Jonathan Haber, who wrote all about the elements. You can read it in a day. It's very good. So he defined the 4 elements of critical thinking. First, structured thinking, what we all probably know as logic, putting your things in a logical order that people can follow. Second, argumentation. How are you going to defend and debate your ideas, and how are you going to refine your ideas as a consequence of debating them as well? How do we create our arguments, defend our arguments, and adapt our arguments based on what we're doing? Other elements, your use of language in terms of communication, in terms of how you influence people. And then the last one we should all be familiar with, controlling for biases, our own personal biases as well. So Haber argues that if these are the 4 elements of critical thinking, if you can work on these 4, you can develop somebody who can think more critically. So one of my challenges, before I came to EA, I spent many years working in a variety of places, and what I became very passionate about was experiential learning. You can tell people how to think, you can give them resources, you can tell them to read a website, but until they have that experience, until they feel it, and until they actually do it, they're probably not going to retain it. So, I'll give you an observation. We probably might not remember the last person we spoke to, but we've all had an experience in a restaurant. We've had a bad experience in a restaurant. And why do we remember that? We remember that because of how the person made us feel. Frustrated, angry, humiliated, embarrassed, whatever it is. And we've held on to that emotion. And that's why we've been able to retain that interaction, even though maybe it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. So this has a learning impact as well. One of the challenges that I'm seeking to try and do here is not just try and shape the thinking of people, because now you can outsource that to Gen AI. What we need to do is, how are they going to retain that information? There are 2 ways of doing it. First, how are they going to feel it? We need people to feel because then they will remember whatever that experience is. Generally, it's more negative emotions than positive emotions. But also, we need to get them to do it as well. So the idea is, we give you a project, whatever it may be, you have the thinking around it, then you will hopefully get into the work, you'll be the feeling of how difficult it is, how frustrating it is, and then you'll actually be doing it. And that means that they will retain the knowledge and the skills that they develop as a consequence. So how are we going to do this? So there are two ways. Levanta su mano perdón, I'm going to have to switch to English again, sorry. Hands up, thanks. Hands up, has anyone dived here? Bucear. Levanta su mano? Okay, gracias. Okay, so for those of you who have dived, you know the experience. You dive in and you're going deeper. And then everything starts to get a bit darker. Everything seems to get a bit more pressured. Everything gets a bit, lose your way. And eventually you will stabilize and then you will come back up. So that is the analogy that we are using in terms of trying to develop critical thinking. For those of you doing your grado or your master's or your PhD or a long-term project, you've all had that experience where you have a problem. And how are you going to solve it? You have to get more into the information, more into the research. There are inconsistencies. Everybody disagrees. There are strengths. There are weaknesses. How do you resolve all of these? And it's an emotional process. That was my experience of doing my PhD, and I'm sure for everybody else, that how you manage your emotions through that learning process. Now, the challenge that we are seeking to do, just to link it to the diving idea, is you're going deeper and deeper while you're studying, while you're trying to work out your big project. You're getting frustrated, you're getting angry, and eventually you come up and that you can clearly define and explain what you worked on. It's very clear when people know what they're talking about and when they don't, just by asking a couple of questions. So this is what we seek to replicate in future years in EA. So what does that actually look like? We are going to be giving them a formal course on critical thinking. The idea is you pick your project and you are going to take you through the critical thinking process, but we want you to feel it and we want you to do it. We're not just going to say, here's the lecture, fill in an essay, now you're done. You need to know that experience of feeling and doing it, and then you are more likely to retain the experiences that you have. So that's one way in which we're going to develop critical thinking. And then the second, more for this audience, is some of what we've been doing in terms of experience, in terms of designing and running experiments. So I have a short video here which explains one of the classes that we currently run in terms of designing and running business experiments.
And I teach a class that's called Business Experimentation. And essentially what we're trying to do is get all the knowledge our students currently have, is to show them the methodology that we have to follow whenever we have to deal with a business experiment, and they also get to apply it with business partners that we have from all over the world. So something that I emphasize quite a lot whenever we are in class is that we need to focus on the methodology. I really do not care about the outcome. Some partners are a bit more receptive, some partners are not. So they have to deal with all that uncertainty, and it's something that adds a lot of value because for a lot of them it's the first time that they have to deal with the CEO of a company. So how do I use everything I know about human behavior, about anthropology, economics, criminology, to something that's tangible and can actually add value to a business? But if I was to highlight two of the main skills that they learn, is that they learn to be great businessmen and great scientists. Luckily for us, last year, the main goal of our business partners was to increase their economical return of all the efforts that we were increasing, and we were able to work with one of them to increase their bottom line and create $60,000 of extra revenue. My name is Adrian Salinas. I study behavioral and social sciences. I'm a fourth year. So what we learned was how to apply scientific procedures into real business cases. So the main difference that you would get, for example, when you hire a normal consultant would be that they will focus on business problems. What we learn is how to reframe them into behavioral problems, and you solve them very differently and the results are usually better. I think it exceeded my expectations in every way. I think it's the most useful class I've had in my 4 years at a university, by far. I think the best thing about this class is you learn how to reframe business problems, which I think a lot of companies are lacking.
Behavioral science is a very multidisciplinary degree. We take classes from economics to sociology to anthropology. So one of the biggest challenges is to understand the students how we can integrate all of this knowledge. The class of business experimentation gave us the skills and the chance to integrate all of this knowledge into a real-life business case where we could help businesses solve their problems using behavioral science. We each had a team leader, which was the person responsible for communicating with the clients. In this case, I took on that role. And with this, I made my way into the company and I got an internship as a UX researcher. So it was definitely a very useful course. We have spent 3 years in the classroom, and this course gave us the first opportunity to what the real business world will be like.
So I'll share an anecdote. So what we did there was we wanted them to feel and do it. So it was, okay, there's 3 of you. Go and meet this client and figure out what their problem is. And there was one particular group who joined a client from Latin America, and then they realized no one in our group speaks Spanish, and this person doesn't speak English. So I can guarantee you they have remembered that. The first thing they need to check is, can we actually communicate together? But this kind of model can be applied anywhere. Essentially, you just need somebody who's a behavioral scientist who can find some low priority projects, take people who want to do it, and tell them, you 3, go and meet this client, figure out what their problem is, diagnose it with behavioral science, and design and run an experiment. And so the experiences that they've had have led to positive outcomes for these students, and it's something I'm very proud of all of them, that they've created things that are so valuable. So this is something not just for higher education. If there are resources and people available, this can be done. So the other part, okay, that sounds all very nice. We should run experiments. We should do all of these nice things. But this is more my criminological background coming in, is like I don't always believe what people say. So one of the key elements of people using Gen AI, which I think is very important, is we need to test the authenticity of the work. Have you actually written this? And there are 2 ways in which we can do this. First, can they persuade? And second, can they defend it? So what do we mean by persuading? One of the elements that we talked about by Haber was communication, was your language skills and your influencing skills as well. So we need students who can actually persuade people that this is what it is. You may have done an original work, but if you freeze in the presentation, it's not going to look good, is it? So that's what we try and do here by giving them leadership and influence. But you can learn leadership frameworks, models, theories all day, and those are important, but it's actually doing it that matters. So what we did this year was, I said to a professor, I want you to run a leadership course, and I want them to feel it, and I want them to do it. So what that eventually came out as, the students are running the classroom. So what that means is, the professor says, you 3, go and learn this piece of literature. You're going to have a 20-minute slot in 3 days, and you're teaching the class. And so what they have to then think is, I have 60 people in front of me. How am I going to keep them quiet? How are we going to keep them engaged? And what types of activities can I create that is going to embed this? They can't just read a leadership theory out to them, because they'll completely disengage, because that's how they feel. So they have to be more creative, and they have to show that leadership and that influencing as well through what they do. So this is, we had some people, they were doing dancing to demonstrate leadership. We had people crying, going to the swimming pool, all of these kind of mad things. So, but then the final element, can they defend what they do? Typically, all of us, we've been through a university experience, we have to write a lot. We have to fill in tests, do exams. But one of the elements that we're going to have to do more of is people orally defending that work, because you cannot rely on what you read is actually their work. So there are 2 ways that we are doing this more. It's like, and this is probably more for people who are working in organizations, thinking of recruiting people, thinking of how they test, whether they know what they're talking about. You can focus on testing their process. Talk me through how you came up with your research question. talk me through how you adapted your research question based on your literature review. What kind of difficult decisions did you have to make, and what were the strengths and weaknesses of these? These type of powerful questions will very quickly tell you whether somebody knows what they're talking about or not. But then there's also another element which is important to us all in the social sciences, is in terms of evaluating the content. Do they understand the differences between high-ranked and low-ranked journals, peer review or not, all of these types of elements? Are they just relying on sources from the last 3 years? These kind of elements in testing the source hierarchy and validity as well. But we can't do that by getting them to write it out, because guess what? They'll use ChatGPT. So we have to get them to orally explain it, and we would say, you've had enough experience in talking to people, you should be able to explain this. That's how it works. So, to finalize, ultimately, I'm maybe sounding a bit harsh, but ultimately, why I wanted to define Gen Z at the beginning is ultimately we need to have empathy for a generation that is going under a disruptive change in terms of they are more measured, they're more tracked, they have to manage their physical world and their digital world and their personas in that. So we need to have empathy for how difficult that is. And is it any wonder, from a behavioral perspective, when you're overloaded with information and you feel like you're under pressure from the real world and the digital world, is it any wonder you've got something here that can make things more productive, that can make your worries about your scores or your exams go away? That I completely understand, but then it's on the job of us, whether we are working with them, whether we're recruiting or developing them, to create things in which they can still learn the skills, rather than just having a superficial level of knowledge. So, how do we guide others through the thinking, feeling, doing of critical thinking, getting them to feel it, getting them to actually do it? And how do we redivert resources to test the authenticity of the work? Do they know what they're talking about? And that is it. I'd like to say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alistair. Tenemos preguntas para Alistair. Por aquí abajo, Gonzalo.
Yes, there's one question down here. We need a mic for him. Gracias, Alistair, por tu presentación.
Question, which is, how do you imagine the world of education 15, 20 years from now?
I don't think that far ahead. I work on the principle that Gen AI can't do two things. Oh no, Gana's going to ask me a question. Gen AI can't do two things. It can't do critical thinking and it can't do empathy. So we need to boost those types of skills. I think there's a tremendous opportunity in terms of how they use these tools to collate and analyze information, but I think we need to spend more time on developing the human and the humanities skill, not skills, I'm not going to talk in that way, the feeling, the sentimientos, the engagement with emotions more to create more rounded people. I think that's probably where our focus can come from. But 15, 20 years, well, I know I won't be retired by that point anyway, so, but thank you for the question, Gonzalo.
Por aquí hay otra pregunta.
Thank you so much, Alistair. This was very thought-provoking. I just wanted to ask you, so Microsoft just came out with some stats, and apparently 75% of the workforce bring their own AI to work.
Mm-hmm.
So would your goal be to decrease that percentage, or would your goal be to teach people to critically think with machines?
Good question. Thank you, Gana. So I think for me, where I am is I am not an expert like Gana, but what I see are the effects of these in a kind of a superficial level of knowledge, and they can produce things that look credible, they're written credibly, and those kind of elements. The challenge is that I've not yet seen how you can use these tools to critically think, because there's an element of how we think. I'm a very big believer in reading and writing. So why do we read? Why do I read and why do I write? I read because, not just because I'm reading the words on the page to follow the story or the idea, is that it sets off ideas, things I already know, and that when I try and transfer that to writing, I'm putting down my idea, and I think I want to write it down, but what I write is actually kind of completely different to what I'm actually thinking. But in between that point is my creative process. I'm linking it to other ideas. I'm linking it to strengths and weaknesses as well. And then, hopefully, by the end of it, I've come up with my own view of what these things are, whether I think it's credible, whether I think it's useful, whatever it is. How we use these tools to do that kind of mental process, and how we follow that mental model, I don't have an answer to that. I think it would be useful maybe running somebody going through that process and then using Gen AI to do it. I'm sure that's being done. But yes, I don't have an answer. Thank you, Gana.
Thank you, Alistair. ¿Tenemos más preguntas? Creo que no.
Creo que no. Muchas gracias, Alistair.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Una mañana intensa, unas conexiones muy interesantes, unas organizaciones bastante valiosas que están dibujando no solamente el presente, sino el futuro.
Así es.
Gracias por acompañarnos durante estos 2 días llenos de conocimiento, ideas, visiones y experiencias.
Así es, les invitamos a continuar participando en los workshops de la tarde para las personas que se inscribieron y a seguir compartiendo sus reflexiones en redes sociales con el hashtag Cooperar nos une.
Cooperar nos une. Esperamos próximamente estar compartiéndoles a todos ustedes las memorias del evento. Esperamos que también sus reflexiones circulen, que le cuenten a toda esta comunidad lo que está sucediendo en América Latina y que nos podamos ver muy pronto de nuevo en la próxima edición del Encuentro Internacional de Ciencias del Comportamiento.
Gracias, feliz tarde.